Thanks for coming. This talk is about taking back your IDE. My name is Lincoln Baxter. And why are we here? We're here because using tools helps us complete our job. Twitter is a tool for sharing information. It's fairly effective, it's simple, it works. If you want to follow me, that's my username. And this is my weird, really awkward profile photo. But the tools we use more often are IDEs, right? They're the things we use on a daily basis. We use the command line, we use text editors, etc. The problem with IDEs is that they're great for editing, but not very good at automating. And they're also not so great for extending and sharing. It takes a lot of work. If you want to write an extension for an IDE, you have to learn that IDE's proprietary APIs. That's pretty much true of learning any framework. But then you also have to learn like the distribution system and get it to work in this heavyweight environment that you have to bootstrap in order to be able to test. And it's kind of a pain. So we're here to try to figure out how to make that better. The objectives for the day. This talk is about JBoss Forge. We're going to learn why Forge can help with these things. What's Forge for? We'll use Forge to just briefly highlight the goals of the project and what it can do. But really, this talk is about how to extend it to quickly build and share tools that will make you, your teammates, friends, people out in the open source community more productive. So the other thing we'll show is how to reuse these tools. When you write extensions for IDEs, typically you're writing something for one platform. And it's very difficult to take what you've done in that platform and use it, say, maybe in an embedded JavaScript. Not JavaScript, in an embedded Java application. Or run it in a web page. Something where you're not running in the native environment. That's something IDEs make tough, and it's a problem that we're working on solving. Why Forge? We believe that programming should be pragmatic, productive, and most importantly, fun. And that by building tools that we can easily extend, share, and create collaborative solutions, we can create a community that will drive an ecosystem that makes us all more productive. That's what Forge is about. It's about creating this ecosystem where we can create, share, and build on each other's tools. Forge, out of the box, aids in the automation of common development tasks. It performs the setup of boilerplate code configuration. It'll help you set up your Java EE specs. It'll help you integrate technologies like Archillion, for example. Like we have an Arai plugin for Forge. It'll help you set up Arai. And it helps you focus on the business-centric activities instead of the mundane daily activities that you're stuck with. So one of the things that we promise with Forge is that when you write a tool, you'll be able to use that in the environment of your choice to do these automation tasks, to perform the setup, and to help you focus on your goals. One thing that Forge is not, it is not an editor. You will not see a text editor and be able to type things into files. That's not what we're about. We're about using the tools that are out there. It's like there's plenty of good text editors. We're not going to reinvent that. There's plenty of good graphical IDEs. We're not going to reinvent the IDE. Forge is filling the gaps between functional tools and what's already out there. So let's just take a quick look at what Forge actually is. We'll build an application, and I'm going to have you guys help me do that. I want to build a web application. What should I do? What's the first thing you would do if you wanted to build a web application that's going to run on a Java enterprise server?
Entity creation.
What was that?
Entity creation.
Entity creation. Okay. Where am I going to create my entity? In the IDE. Okay. Well, before I create an entity, I probably need a project, right? I need something to actually contain all this code. So I'll go into Eclipse, and I'll say a new web project. Now I could do it this way, but I also want to use Maven because I don't like copying jar files and managing all that myself. So let's go with the Maven approach. We're going to make a new Maven project, And we get presented with this, if the internet works, nice list of archetypes that I can pull from. You know, I can probably pick a straight servlet project or a JPA project, and it's going to have some sample code that I can look at, most likely. Lovely. But once that generates, you know, we'll have something to work with. But I'm going to end up deleting a lot of code in order to get it back to a place where I want. I find that archetypes end up being more confusing than they are helpful frequently. Okay. Huh. All right, let's just restart this. We're going to skip generating a Maven project. I think we all know how to set up a new project. But the point is that it takes some work. Okay. When Eclipse comes back, we'll just see how to use Forge to do this. We'll spend a couple minutes building an application just so we can see the intent. All right, let's get rid of this code. So Forge is actually running an Eclipse here. It's in this particular form, an extension of Eclipse. We've handled, you know, working with OSGI and building the Eclipse interfaces and using that, and we've encapsulated it into this menu. And this is the Forge context menu, where the commands that come with Forge are presented, and you can create a new project. Actually, I want to do it here. So Forge is asking us, okay, well, what's the project name? What kind of application do we want to build? A web application. What do we want it to do? What are some ideas? Like, what kind of web app would you want? Just for an example. Like a store, or
just even a CRUD app.
Do you want to build a store, or
Just the attendee session example, just the report.
What's that?
The attendee session.
The attendee session? Okay. That's the one I usually go with. I was trying to give you guys a chance to make me think on my feet, but I'll just deal with that one. So we're going to go with the conference rating application. And we pick Java web application and Maven. Click Finish. That project should show up in our workspace, but it didn't. So we're going to import it. All right, here it is. So what do we have? Right now we have a Maven web application. Great, very useful. So now let's set up the persistence layer. We go back to Forge, we type persistence, or JPA, setup, and it's going to walk us through the setup process. So we click Next, and we already selected JBoss EAP6, which is what we're going to deploy to. It knows we're using Hibernate and a default data source configuration. We click Finish, and it's done. What this has given us is a persistence XML file. And if you were in this room 2 sessions ago, you would have seen this happening from the command line. The list of commands here is context sensitive. So when I'm in a project, I see a whole lot more than when I am just not selected on anything. So the idea is that this tool sort of understands where you are and what you're working on at that particular time when you want to run something. So we're also going to create a new entity in this project, and we'll call it attendee. There it is. And attendee has, say, a name, and attendee has, yeah, we'll just go with name. And attendees can go to sessions, so we need another entity. And sessions have a name and also a list of attendees, right? People have to actually attend things. So field attendees. Here we're targeting the session object because we've already selected it over here on the left. And instead of string this time, I want to use attendees as the field type. Each session is going to have many attendees, so we pick the one-to-many relationship type. And we can also create an inverse mapping in the attendee object for their sessions. So here's a session with a list of attendees. Actually, it should have been many-to-many probably, right? But we'll just go with this. Anyway, once this is done, we can then continue generating. We can build an app. Do you guys want me to finish this app, or do you want to see how to write tools? Okay. So the idea is that this whole list of commands that shows up is provided by add-ons, extensions. By default, when you start Forge, it does nothing. It's just going to sit there, going to be dumb, nothing happens. And I can show that over here. I started Forge, it's got nothing in it. So what I can do is install the core add-ons, and the next time I start Forge, it'll load them all up. We'll see a shell. We'll see those commands presented there in the command line. The Eclipse distribution actually has the basic core add-ons built in by default, but it also uses the same repository that this is. So if we add something in Eclipse, it'll also show up in the command line. So here's Forge. Now that we've installed the core add-ons, which includes the shell and the basic commands, we have a whole lot of things we can do. You know, we can do the same project new. One of the goals of Forge is to present tools in a way that people want to use them. It's embeddable tools. So when you write an add-on, it's going to run in Eclipse, it's going to run in the shell, it's going to run in any environment that Forge is running in. So how do we get started writing an extension? First, let's take a look at how Forge works. If I can find my presentation again. Here we go. Okay. So how does it work? Before we dive in, Forge is basically a lightweight module system. How many people have heard of OSGI? Okay. And how many people are familiar with how OSGI works? You have multiple class loaders, they all talk to each other, and you get a dependency hierarchy. So Forge has the same concept, and because there are some features of OSGI that we thought were too cumbersome to make people work with, we wrapped a lightweight module system around Maven and called it Furnace. Furnace runs add-ons that live in what's called the add-on repository. And using the same JBoss modules library that the JBoss application server uses, we build class loaders. We provide hot swapping, so you can actually remove a module at runtime. You can install a module at runtime. Furnace will take it down, boot up whatever it needs to make the services work. It also provides class loader isolation. That's the same thing as OSGI. And it provides the dependencies between these add-on class loaders. This is all contained within what we call the add-on registry, which is sort of the access point for what these add-ons provide. Each add-on has what's called a container, or it can use a container, and sorry that's small, but just assume the yellow thing there is the container. The container says, okay, this add-on provides classes, like it's basically just a class loader to start with. The container provides a service registry that lets you define certain classes that behave as special services. And those are available through the service registry using the Furnace Java APIs. That says furnace.get_addon_registry.getServices service type x.class. This is how you interact with Furnace as a module system. But that's not very pleasant. So the services in the service registry can also depend and export those services to other add-ons. They can provide services or consume them. And when you write your add-on, you might include Java code, right? Code compiles down to a jar. You could include other people's jars, and you might even include other resources that will be available. Or you could provide a service that does some call out to the web or to a database or whatever. All of that gets packaged up. And you can also depend on other add-ons. That's one of the big things about this model is when someone writes an add-on, when you write an add-on, you can actually share that, and someone writing a completely separate add-on can use what you've done as a building block. So here, your add-on is now installed into the add-on repository. And the way that gets installed is with what's called the add-on manager. The add-on manager knows how to read Maven POM files. So when you build your add-on, it's just a Maven project. It's got a POM file, you specify your dependencies, and the add-on manager figures out where things go, what's a library and what's another add-on dependency. The add-on manager knows how to build projects or check out code from Git. This is one of the primary mechanisms for distribution. So if you can't publish to a Maven repository and share your code that way, you can just post it up onto a Git repository on GitHub. The add-on manager will go out to GitHub, check out your code, build the project as a local project, and then install the artifacts from your local repository. So we want sharing of these add-ons to be as easy as possible. We don't want you to have to publish to a specific place. You should just be able to push your code up and it should work. This is all what makes up the core of Forge. And that's what the IDE uses, that's what the command line uses, and other embedded pieces of the system. So let's build something. I'm actually going to use Forge to make a new project. And as you can see on the left, we're going to be doing stuff with email. I've written a small add-on that provides the ability to send an email to a number of addressees, subject, body, typical email. And what we want to do is put a user interface on top of that so that we can actually just call it up here in Eclipse and send an email from the IDE. Just for example's sake, in this menu there is nothing that has to do with mail. So there's nothing installed right now. So let's go ahead, we're going to make a new project. I'm going to sit for this. And we're going to call this Mail UI 2. Let's delete this first. This is my proving it works to myself. All right. New project. Project name is going to be Mail UI. And instead of a Java web application, we're going to pick Forge add-on. And I'm sorry for you guys over here. You can't see me now. Oh, that wasn't good. There we go. Okay. So we're going to pick Forge add-on. And we have another step available to us. We're going to pick the furnace container that we want to use. Here we're going to use the CDI programming model. And we want to depend on the user interface because we want to build something that people can interact with. The user interface add-on is what provides what we're looking at here. It's all of these, different options, toggles, buttons. But it's probably not going to be what you think it is. Because as you recall, this needs to run in not only the IDE, but also in the shell. So how do you handle that abstraction? This is effectively a user interface abstraction layer. So we hit OK. For some reason, it's not importing my project here, but let's just go grab it. Here it is. And as you can see, it is an empty CDI project with a test case. Our POM file has actually been set up a little bit because we did choose the container, here CDI. And then it's also set up the Forge furnace test harness for us. this is where we're going to write our integration tests, or what we're going to write our integration tests with. And down here at the bottom is our dependency on the UI add-on. So now that we have this, we want to create a command. We want something that's actually going to be able to run and show up in the IDE. So we can go back to the list of Forge commands and say, generate me a new Forge command. So target package is going to be commands, and the command name is going to be send email. The category will be email, and then send. And here's our command object. Can you guys read that? Okay. So this is the basic command interface. It gives you a way to define what that command is. Then you can initialize the user interface and execute it. But this seems pretty complicated, right? So let's actually simplify this. Let's delete everything out of this class. This is going to be our command. I just want to write a function. Private, public result. This is a command result, basically returns success or failure with a message and an exception. And we're going to call this send email. What did I do wrong? Right. And we need to return a result. From results, let's just fail for starters. Let's succeed. Let's be positive. Okay. Now I need to tell Forge that it's a command. Done. All right, let's run it. See what happens. I'm going to ask Forge to build and install this add-on, which should take a couple seconds, and then we should see this command, if we've done everything right, come up in the menu. There it is. And when I ran this command, nothing happens. Not really sure why nothing happens, but let's just see if this keeps working. So this command needs to take some arguments, right? We can apparently run this thing, but we need to be able to know who to send the email to, for instance. So let's say to subject line, body, and print out that we sent this email to all these three things mashed together. Now let's see what happens when we reinstall this and rerun it. There, now we actually sent an email to nothing. Why was it nothing? Because Forge didn't know that these were command options. So we add the option annotation to these, and it needs a value 2. CC and body. Reinstall. Now we have a dialog box in like 3 lines of code. So now I can type my name here, CC all of you, and then type my message. And here it is. It's very small, you can't read that, but it showed up. I noticed one problem though. The body was just a text input field, right? It would be nice if that showed up as a text area. So we can actually give a hint to the user interface and say that this is actually when it's being displayed, probably better as a text area. For the command line, it's not going to matter because it's just going to accept text as an argument. But here it actually makes a difference because we're showing this to people. So the next time I do my lovely build and install, we will see this presented as a text area. So we can accept some information now, but how are we actually going to send this? As I said before, I actually wrote a little email add-on that provides the email service. And this email service is going to set up the JavaX mail API to be able to send emails from my personal email account. And all I need to do from my email user interface is now use that. So I'm using CDI here. I'm just going to inject private email service. Nothing's happening. Why can't I access my email service? Because I need to add the dependency, that's right. So I'm going to go back to my POM file, and I'm just going to copy this one because it's basically the same thing, and I'm going to reference the mail dependency. Now if you notice, these add-on dependencies are slightly different from other dependencies. There's a classifier, Forge add-on, that is not usually something you would do when you depend on something. This classifier is actually something that we use as a hint to the furnace manager. It tells the furnace manager, this dependency is an add-on. Don't look at its transitive dependencies. It's going to provide everything. Just create a runtime dependency on that add-on and go from there. But I need a version for this. So what version is my mail add-on? Version 1. So now I depend on version 1 of the Forge mail add-on. Now, when I want to send email, I have my email service, mailer, and I'm going to, instead of just returning a result, I'm going to use that mailer to send an email to everyone we want to. I don't have a CC. Subject, subject, body, body. Okay. And if everything goes well, this should now send the email message. So let's build and install this again. Oops. Build and install. Now, send email. Who would like to receive an email? Probably no one. Oh, okay, sure, Brad. I have a demo account set up already. If I can get out of this. This is my Forge Mail demo email account. And I'm going to bring this over to my screen here so we can see this happening, hopefully in real time. Make this a little smaller. Hopefully Gmail is going to be quick and I won't have to go over there and refresh. But let's go ahead and send email to forgemaildemo@gmail.com. This is actually the subject line from the demo. And the body is going to be, hey everyone, I was sent from Forge. Taking a little longer this time. That's probably a good sign. And the internet works in mysterious ways. Email sent. There it is. So that's an example of an add-on dependency. We consumed a service that someone else, myself, wrote, in our own add-on with a very, very simple user interface. So let's see about maybe sending an email from here. Huh, it's already there. We installed this add-on into the user's default add-on repository. This instance of Forge has already picked that up and started the add-on. So when I send an email, send it to Forge mail demo@gmail.com. Subject line sent, let's put this in quotes, sent from the CLI, body, hit return, and again we got this lovely internet delay, but that's a good sign because it means it's actually doing something. Should also see the results printed in the console when this finishes. Come on.
Is there a way to get a feedback about what is actually happening? Like at least like the progress bar?
Yes, and I will show you that in just a second.
You want
That-
a subject here instead of CC.
Yeah, I misnamed I misnamed the input. Where's my email? Here, sent from the CLI. So as we can see, this is the same add-on running in two different environments. There's a third environment that we want to demonstrate, and that's just plain old Java embedded, right? So if I wanted to show or send an email from an application, I would probably not do it with Furnace because Furnace is a little bit heavy for just sending email. But if you want to reuse tools that Forge is providing, what we do here is we get a handle of the Furnace instance. We just get a Furnace. We tell it, here's the repository where the add-ons are. Then we ask it to install the mail add-on using the Furnace Manager, add-on manager. Install it. Start Furnace. We could have actually started Furnace up here. And then wait for Furnace to start, get an instance of our email service, and then send an email. So let's try this real quick. Run as Java application. Here you can see Furnace starting. It started our mail add-on and sending the email. This lovely delay again. And here it is from Embedded Forge. So this is the goal. We want to write tools that can be reused in any environment. But you asked how I would, what was your question again?
Well, just
The progress bar, right.
not necessarily a progress bar, but at least have some feedback that actually it's working, not necessarily hanging.
Right. So there is the Forge console, which, while Forge is running, will actually show output from the commands. If I were to get a hold of the UI provider, UI context, then here I could say context dot get provider dot get output dot out dot println. And here I could say send an email. And now if I rebuild and install this, the next time I run it, it should show this in the Forge output window. Demo@gmail.com. It didn't. Not sure why exactly. Oh, it's down here, sorry. It's a different console. So now it's using the normal Eclipse console window to show you that feedback. The other option you have is to actually use a progress bar, and that can be done similarly using the context, the provider, you can get a progress bar from one of these guys. I don't remember where the progress bar is. I know it's in the install from Git. So actually maybe a better way to show this would be to show just installing an add-on, because I know it's going to do that. So if I were to install an add-on from Git, this is an example of distributing an add-on or using someone else's add-on that's already been published. I can just click install here, and now this particular command uses the task progress monitor, and it's going to show us the various steps that it's performing. This is a relatively new feature, which is why not a lot of the commands use it, but we're going back and now using this. So I have 10 more minutes. I think what I want to show you guys is the other APIs for building commands that I started to show at the beginning, the really complex way. But I'm not going to write it out. I'm just going to show you the email command finished in a nice polished form. Are there any other questions while we wait for this to finish?
So how many add-ons are published and available public?
So the question is, how many add-ons are public and available? We have currently, I believe, 20 or 30 add-ons that we've produced for various features like parsing Java. Actually, I can show you guys a list here. Add-on list. So we have, of the add-ons we've written, the add-on manager itself, configuration add-on for storing persistent configuration. We have conversion APIs. We have database tools for actually connecting to a database and pulling information about tables and stuff, or connecting to it using the database connection library. I forget the name of it right now. We have dependencies add-on for interacting with Maven dependencies. So if you want to modify a project and add dependencies to it, you get hold of the dependency installer, you give it the coordinates, and it will update the project you're working on to install those dependencies or to configure something like that. We have the Java IDE add-on, which is what is providing the code generation commands for building a Java IDE application. We have my lovely little mail add-on here that I wrote a couple hours ago, and Maven for interacting with Maven. There's a whole lot of stuff here. There's also a couple, like the one that I just asked to be installed, which is apparently not working. I don't have the internet, probably. Great, it's going to sit there. There's an AngularJS extension for the scaffold to build HTML5 clients. There is an Archillion add-on. And the idea here is that we want to build a community around this. So I can get back to my presentation here for a minute. We want to build a community around this that will let people easily see the add-ons that are out there, right? We have add-ons that we write for JBoss projects. We have add-ons that other people in the open source community will write. We have, I guess, corporate partners that would want to distribute their tools, and they could do it using this platform. You write an add-on, you publish the code somewhere on GitHub, or you publish it to a Maven repository, and now anyone can use your tools through Eclipse, the command line. We're actually working on IntelliJ and NetBeans support as well. And, of course, all of you, right? Individuals can write add-ons. I wanted to show you guys our new website today, but we're not ready, unfortunately, which is going to let you actually sign up with the JBoss community account and post your add-on, basically like a registry of add-ons. So you go and you create your account, you say, I'm the author, this is my add-on, here's a few docs about how to use it, and then you just copy a line from that on a website into your Forge, and it'll install it and bring those tools out to whoever wants to use it. And, of course, make them reusable, right? So you can depend on them in many ways. So to recap, JBoss Forge can automate common development tasks, as you saw with the Java EE stuff. It allows you to extend its behavior, hopefully in a somewhat more productive way than other tools that are out there, with a simple programming model that is easy to get started with, but also expands to support more complex things without constraining you to a particular development environment, without constraining you to a particular language. One thing I didn't mention is that the Furnace container, as long as the service objects that you're producing in that container can be represented with the Java type, you could have produced that service with Groovy. You could have done it with JavaScript and Rhino. And as long as the class object is what's exported, no one else cares because they have their service. So it lets you use your programming model as well. So build something and share it. This is where we're headed with JBoss Forge. I hope you guys liked it. I'm the project lead. That's my weird picture. That's George Gastaldi, the add-on development lead. He's working on building not only the core framework, but also the plugins for the JBoss projects and helping other JBoss project leads work with us and build their extensions. Stelle Peterson, who is the command line lead, and Kuhn, who is our Eclipse integration lead. So he's the guy that's done most of the work to build the interface you saw in Eclipse, where I was running the commands right there. And then all of you. I hope that you like what you saw and you get inspired and try to build something cool with this, because I think that it's just unlimited. We can do whatever you want. So thank you. I'm going to show you the finished mail command if anyone wants to stick around, but otherwise if there are questions.
I have a question. Does this help you at all with the server side? Let's say I want to design web apps using Spring MVC, Spring Security, and it's one thing to be able to compile it on the development side, but if I'm going to run it in JBoss and I have to install Spring as a module, does it help you install it as a module?
So the question you're asking, if I understand you correctly, is does Forge help you or have an add-on that will help you install or configure the application server?
Additions that we add to it, like JBoss ships with certain modules, but if I want to add Spring or my custom library,
right.
Does it help me do that?
So this is actually something that just came up on our development list. They're talking about how to make that easier. Excuse me. And I think that Forge is actually a good place for this because it's a simple use case that has a very complicated implementation. So this would be a perfect place to put an add-on that would help do that. It's just not something we've done yet.
Oh yeah, how, as this grows, how are you going to manage all the dependencies and all the versions of each of these different add-ons?
So versioning is a good question. As it turns out, it's also a really tough one. And I think it's been tough for a long time, right? Like we're not the first people to try to do something like this. But we are probably going to experience some of the same growing pains that people have had over the years because it is new. Hopefully we can learn from that. But currently the way versioning works is when you install an add-on, we only let you run one version of any given add-on. So you could think of it as like a simple Unix model, like you've got a library that other things can reference, but you only get one version of each thing. So if you upgrade one of those libraries, if it's not backwards compatible, you could actually break something.
Yeah.
So we try to release currently the core as a stack, everything at once. But we are going to have to figure out how to handle that a little more gracefully.
Okay. It's probably going to depend on the good graces of the developers out there, to not just make us.
For now, the power is in your hands.
Okay.
If you're traumatized by the KNR bracket style like I am, can you generate code with 1 TBS?
Yeah. The code you saw here was using my Eclipse code formatter.
Okay, cool.
Forge is not an editor.
So
So how can I interact with the source code which is generated? So if I wanted, for instance, to write a document which does actual source code formatting or something like this, also maybe some analysis of source code.
So the question is, how can I interact with source code? And the answer is, if you look at this list of add-ons we provide, the next one that I didn't get to is the Java parser, which is how you would interact with Java sources. We also have a JSON parser and an XML parser. Those are the ones we have right now. But to use that, it is basically wrapping the Eclipse JDT in a Fluent API. As a project, we have actually split off onto its own called Roaster. And wow, I really don't have internet. Let's try this again. It's basically a Fluent API, so you use sort of the builder pattern to do everything. You ask the parser to create you a Java class, and then from there you can add a field or you can add a method. It handles properties for you. There is a formatter extension. So if you want to point that at an Eclipse format file, like configuration file, there we go. It'll format the code that it generates according to that, which is what we do with the actual integration with the IDE. It's pulling the preferences out of that. So let me find test case, Java class tests. All right. Okay, that's not a very good example. Okay, here. So here we've got, roaster.create, new Java class source, and then we're setting the package, setting the name, adding a type variable to the class, so adding a generic type to it, and then, this is just a test to see that you can add type variables. Here we're adding a super type. And it's basically underneath the covers is an AST, which is very ugly and painful. It takes a lot of code to write, so we've just tried to simplify it down to the point where...
And how do you deal with modifications by a developer to the source file? If I add the method to an entity, for instance?
Right. So when a developer or some other program or whatever modifies a source file, so like if I went back to Eclipse here and just changed something while I was working with Forge, Forge is going to reparse that, and because it's using the Eclipse JDT, which is an AST-based, an abstract syntax tree-based implementation, it's only going to touch the pieces of that tree that it needs to work with. So let me, now that I have my IDE back, I want to build and install this. Actually, no, I want to revert this. How much time do I have left? Good question. 8 minutes? Okay. Let's replace this with the header vision, with all the finished stuff. I've already finished implementing the send email command. And also another thing, using the configuration to let you configure SMTP settings, which is using the persistent configuration add-on functionality. So here in this finished version, you can see it's a little more complicated. I've got test harness. I've got the UI. I've actually got a UI test harness. One of the big goals here, you noticed while I was developing that send email command, I had to keep rebuilding it and reinstalling it, which is not really how you want to be writing maintainable code. You don't want to have to retest it every time you do something. So we actually provide this test harness, and the UI test harness is an extension on that. And the test harness is using Archillion, which is another JBoss project. And what it's actually doing is it's starting a Furnace instance while it's running, it's going to deploy all of these add-ons to the container, and then it's going to create an add-on at runtime and deploy that add-on to the container. This add-on depends on all these other things, including the UI test harness. We inject the UI test harness, which we can then use to create a command controller. The command controller is the same thing that Eclipse is using. It's the same thing CLI is using. Once you get your hands on that, then you can just sort of set values into it and then execute the command and test that the result is what you expected and that the operation actually did what you expected. So I think it didn't install that yet. Let's install this guy. And now I'm going to have the send an email message command, which is a little more comprehensive. It has some validation in here. Brad's about to get an email. Subject from the real deal. Finish. And this is the finished product, right? We just sent the email. The other thing that I did was I have this SMTP configuration. Here you can see that we have a couple more input types, right? You have a Boolean input. This is how that gets rendered. There's a secret input field, so you don't actually reveal the password. That works on the command line too, actually. It'll mask out that field as you type it in the buffer. And then just, the settings. When I save this, it'll write it to my persistent configuration, which by default is located, let me bring this up here, in the .forge directory in the config file. And this is all just other add-ons that we've written. So, other questions?
You don't have any add-ons for Spring or Spring MVC?
So we don't have Forge 2 add-ons for Spring or Spring MVC yet. We have them for Forge 1. They need to be ported over. But they're community supported, so it's whenever they're, yeah.
Do you have to do anything special to get like contextual completion on the command line or anything like that?
No, actually. So the nice thing about this is if I open the actual command here, yes and no. By default, it will use what it knows from your commands and try to complete things for you. So like the send email command, or the email, I don't know if right. So it's, when I press tab here, it knows that we have a couple inputs that are defined in our command. Same thing is true if we do it this way using the fully fledged UI API. But to get more control over the completion, you can do something like to.set completer and then new UI completer, which is going to return an iterable object containing all of the completion options. So here's where you could, look up your address book and just return all the addresses. And then that would show up when you press tab in the to with the to field on the command line, which you can see in other commands like project new, type. This one actually happens for free because the project new command, the new project wizard, is actually pulling in, oh, you can't read that. It's using a different input type. We were using string inputs, just a single UI input. This is using a UI select one. And it's pulling in all the project types, which is actually a service provided by many add-ons. Those different project types come from a couple different places. So what happens when you inject this is it says, okay, this is a service that I can look up from Furnace. So it's going to pre-populate those choices for you. But again, if you wanted to, using the UI select one, you could say like type dot set value choices and specify your own choices there. You can also do UI input many, which doesn't have predefined choice selections, obviously, but you would be able to use a completer with that. Completion is free if you use a UI select. If you use UI input many, then you have to specify what completion you want, because it's a more free-form input. Any last questions before we wrap up? Thank you.